get all the way through the rest of the chapter and to the end of chapter 31. All right. And we're in Genesis chapter 30, but we're starting in verse 25. If that's got my stuff correct here. Genesis chapter 30, verse 25. Yeah, there it is. So we've gone through Leah and Rachel and their handmaids having all these children, right? And part of what we see there, the last note from the last time we were together, is as we watch this family work with each other with all their failures, it's a good reminder that how God's dealing with us is a demonstration of a loving kindness that should cause all of us to stand in awe of who God is, right? I know none of us could stand up here without any, even though I'm sure we all have our complaints and you've wronged me here and so did me wrong here and I've had all these problems in my life. We could all lay out those things for us, and then we could also, unfortunately, have a whole list of grievances against us, and probably more so. And ultimately, too, it still comes down to what is the will of God in our life and how is he going to deal with us. And God does choose to, even though he offers grace to all, he offers salvation to all and eternal life and love and blessing for all. How God manifests that is different from person to person, who he gives to what he will. So now we get in here to chapter 30, verse 25. We've got all these kids. We just had Joseph born. And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, Send me away, that I may go unto mine own place and to my country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served thee, and let me go. For thou knowest my service, which I have done thee. So if we think about Jacob's life, how the story's been constructed is Jacob's life has gone from one conflict to the next. And we've just gotten through several years of children being born. One wife is upset with the other wife. Both wives are upset with him. We're going to see later when we get into the story of Joseph, the kids all fight with one another, and that has ramifications for the parents. But we've just now, Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel, has just given birth. She's named him this great name, Jehovah has added. And then the writer has decided, under the will of the Holy Spirit, the next thing they're going to jump to is Jacob saying something to Laban. And what Jacob says is very wise here, but if we've seen a little bit of Laban already, we're going to see very clearly what type of person Jacob is dealing with Laban. And as one person once said years ago, you can't argue math with someone if everything they're going to say back is just colors. Right? Some people are impossible to have an argument or a reasonable discussion with. And we're going to see a little bit of that here with Laban. So Jacob starts off by saying, I have served you for these wives. You know the work I've done for you. I have this track record that I have been dependable and diligent. Now please give me what is owed me. You knew years ago that I was hoping to go back to the land of my father. That was the agreement, right? Okay, watch what Laban says. I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry. For I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake. One commentator notes that Laban realizes, man, as long as Jacob is around, I'm benefiting from this. This guy, whatever he does with his work, the livestock grows. We're adding to us that kind of that type of property that's of great value. And on top of that, his wives are having all these kids. I'm having all these children added to my family. So because of the benefits that are coming to Jacob, I'm getting them by proxy. And it's reasonable for Laban to go, I've noticed this. But as one commentator has noted, Laban's primarily concerned with the benefits, the economic benefits of having Jacob around, and less concerned with the relational benefits. What is his real relationship with Jacob? What is his relationship with his daughters? What is the relationship with his grandchildren? Does he really care about them, or does he care about what he gets from them? So Laban says, if you would, please tarry, because I see that I'm getting all these benefits from you. Verse 28. And he said, appoint me thy wages, and I will give it. So Laban on the one hand says, I'd love for you to stay, but you tell me what I pay you, and I will pay you that. Verse 29. And he said unto him, Jacob says, thou knowest how I have served thee, and how thy cattle was with me. For it was little which thou hadst before I came, and it is now increased unto a multitude. And the Lord hath blessed thee since my coming. And now, when shall I provide for mine own house? The agreement here is Jacob's in charge of all this stuff, but it technically isn't his. So what he's saying to Laban is, I've worked for you all these years. You have prospered because of my work. I would like to have part of what I have produced for you, right? So if I've worked the flock, I would like part of the flock. Verse 31. And Laban says, what should I give thee? What do you want of the flock? Anything. If thou wilt do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep thy flock. So what Jacob is saying is, you're really not giving me anything. I'm going to earn what I want for. What I'm going to ask from you is what I'm already really going to be giving you. Okay? Sounds a little bit like the government and tax returns. Verse 32, he says, I will pass through all thy flock today, removing from thence all the speckled and spotted cattle, and all the brown cattle among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and of such shall be my hire. So Jacob says, I want the cows, the sheep, the goats that have spots. Those are the ones I want. And you can get all the ones that don't have spots on them. All right. Laban agrees to this because the cattle, the livestock that Jacob says he wants, there are fewer of them. And their fewer numbers do not make them worth anymore. So Jacob has said, I've worked for you all this time. It's time for you to let me go, but I need to go with something. And between the two types of livestock we have, I will take the lesser of the two. And Laban agrees to those terms. Now watch what Jacob says here in verse 33. I find this verse has kind of puzzled me all week. So shall my righteousness answer for me in time to come, when it shall come from my hire before thy face. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the sheep, that shall be counted stolen with me. Jacob says, if this is what we've agreed to, we're going to make a covenant. I get everything that's speckled. You get everything that's not. And in time, my keeping of this covenant will prove that I have done what I should. And it will be brought before your face. You will have nothing that you can say against me. And if you say anything against me, it's going to require you to lie. Right? Seems like a pretty good locked-in contract, right? But we know ourselves well enough to know that we're pretty good at lying. And we're pretty good at ignoring that which is brought right up in front of our face. But I think it's also good to note here that when Jacob says, my righteousness will answer for me, my good works will answer for me. As Creon in the play Oedipus says, time reveals all people. And as some of you have heard before, whatever job we have, to do it to the best of our ability, that over time, the work and the fruits of that work will speak for themselves. None of us are without fault. None of us can, have things where we can't say, I could have done that better. But if we give ourselves to doing good work, regardless of what it is, that over time, the work will speak for itself. And that's basically what Jacob has said, right? My work is going to stand up and say that I have done well. What's frustrating about this contract, though, is Jacob shouldn't have to do this. He's already given 14 years of his life plus then. He should be able to go to Laban and say, I've worked for you this long. You now have grandchildren by me. Your livestock is multiplied. It's time for me to go. And Laban should say, you're right, it's time to go. But instead, Jacob's got to enter into a whole nother agreement with Laban. All right? So Laban says, behold, I would, verse 34, I would, it might be according to thy word. So everything you said, let's hope that it plays out. Verses 35 through 42 walks us through a scene where Jacob takes all of the livestock that Laban has entrusted to his management, and he takes them 3 days away from the stuff that Laban and his own sons are going to take care of. And so part of that is to say that you can see I'm not stealing from any of your livestock. You see who I'm taking with me. I go 3 days out and I'm going to work with this number of people. We see a parallel to this in the life of Daniel, where there's the diet of the king. And Daniel says, I don't want to do that diet, but let me so many days to go by this diet, and then we will see who benefits from it. So Jacob takes a flock several days away, and then he does several things where he takes these special rods, he peels the skin off the rods, he sets them in front of the water troughs, and he brings the speckled livestock to drink water in front of these rods, thinking that by them seeing the speckledness in the rod, it will have an effect on the livestock that they produce. Now, whether that was really the case or not, I don't know. We will find out in just a few verses, Jacob's had a vision from God that says, and in that vision, the speckled livestock are producing after their own kind to a greater number than the non-speckled. So Jacob knows that God is going to bless the efforts that I put forth here. But when we get down to the end of the chapter, let's go to verse 43. So Jacob says, we've done the agreement. Laban says, I can have all the speckled. I'm doing something to try to increase the number of speckled. Verse 43. And Jacob increased exceedingly. He had much cattle and maidservants and men servants and camels and asses. Verse 31. And he heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob hath taken away all that was our father's, and of that which was our father's hath he gotten all his glory. The modern phrase today is, haters are going to hate. What's happening here is we see something that is true as long as human beings have been around and even before human beings have been around. An increase of glory does not come without its detractors. You could do something well, there will always be someone there who says, And not just I'm not impressed, can actually put the wrong type of spin on it. Notice here that Jacob has removed himself 3 days from Laban's livestock. He has abided by the agreement that he and Laban have made. Nothing has been done that is evil. And yet Laban's sons are still accusing Jacob of theft. The very thing that Jacob worked very diligently to not be accused of, that's what he's being accused of, right? Now, there are some criticisms that we can level at someone who is profitable or flourishing. So you can take, for example, someone in the entertainment industry. They can probably be number one on the Billboard charts. They can pack out stadiums everywhere. And if we sit back and go, well, the message that they're giving is not a good message, they might come back with, well, haters are going to hate. Well, ideally, we're hating the right things. We should be able to criticize, because we all know that just because someone is flourishing and is extremely wealthy does not mean that they're making their money through ethical means or are then using that money ethically, right? All of us are paying a lot towards Amazon, and we know where Bezos is spending his money. And it's not wrong for us to sit back and say, I'm a critic of certain things. But we probably can't deny the fact that they've put in a great deal of hard work to get where they are. But what we have here with Jacob is an example of someone who has worked hard, has done things ethically, and then there are those who are jealous. And we see this beforehand with Lucifer being jealous of God. He wants the glory that God has. So back to chapter 31. The sons are lying about Jacob. He is stolen, right? And we have to remember that someone whose life is flourishing, if they are also in pursuit of God, it is an obligation on our part to stand back and say, well done to you, and also owing the praise to God because God has chosen to allow certain blessings to come into their life. And reading through Steve Martin's autobiography, Born Standing Up, one of the things Steve Martin does really well in that book, because for a time in the 70s, he was the most popular comedian in the world. He was packing out stadiums. He does a really good job in that book of talking about all the years that he struggled, all the years that he was broke, all the years that he worked. And he's very good in the book to say, I was really successful, I did all this hard work, but at the end of the day, I can't really explain why it's successful, because as through the book, as he introduces us to other people, he is very good at saying, this person was just as talented as I was. This person was just as hardworking as I was. This person helped me out in a small way, and I am the one who got the huge benefits, but I can't ignore the fact that these people who lived the rest of their lives in pretty much anonymity, they still did good work. And I find that highly admirable. It takes me back to a story of Jack Lemmon, who was very popular at the time, right? Famous actor from the time. He had recently made a break in the film industry, and he talks about walking down New York City, a sidewalk in New York City, with another one of his friends who might have been a director of small stage productions. And Jack Lemmon was pointing to a poster for a film that he was in, or for a Broadway production that he was in, and he was pointing it out and kind of enjoying the bravado that comes with that, right? And Jack Lemmon talks about, in that moment, the friend who was with him, who wasn't doing it to cut him down, but remind him that you are the big time now. But you do know that there are just as many people who are just as talented as you that aren't going to get the break that you're going to get. And Jack Lemmon, not that he's a perfect person, but even into his old years, in an interview with Inside the Actor Studio, would recount that story of how he tried to keep that ever with him. No matter how well my career goes and how popular I become, I know that there are those who've helped me along the way, and then there are those who have not had the same benefits for whatever reason. And of course, in Steve Martin's book, what he has not done yet is ever said, he's not ever mentioned, this is the will of God, or this is God's blessing, or how he's gone about this. But one of the things Scripture keeps bringing us always back to is, at the end of the day, while there is the free will of the human, there is still ultimately the superseding will of God. And he gives to whom as he pleases, and he turns the heart of the king as he will. And he has blessed Jacob, and Laban's sons have not agreed, have decided to not see it as that, and they have falsely accused him of theft. So watch what happens. Verse 2. So the sons are lying, and Jacob beheld the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before. So Jacob knows that the sons have lied to their father and persuaded their father against him. Not much has changed in human nature, right? The Lord of the Rings film series does a very good job of this, with the character who is in the ear of the king lying to him. And they can turn that king away from the truth, right? Which is very important who it is. Who is our counselor? Who is talking to us? Who is whispering to us? And sometimes the worst counselor we can have is ourselves. We're very good at lying to ourselves and convincing ourselves of the way things are. So verse 3, the Lord says to Jacob, return unto the land of thy fathers and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. It's time to go. I'll stay with you. So Jacob brings in Rachel and Leah, and he says unto them, notice here, he doesn't just talk to Rachel, he doesn't just talk to Leah, he brings both his wives in. So Leah, the woman who has wanted her husband to love her, and Rachel, the woman who she and Leah are fighting against each other, at least at this point in their life, Jacob is willing to show love to both of them. You're both my wives. This is not the ideal situation, but I'm not only going to talk to Rachel here. I'm going to bring Leah in, and I'll tell you what's going on. And we're going to see a unity here. So he said, I see your father's countenance, that it is not toward me as before, but the God of my father has been with me, and ye know that with all my power I've served your father. And your father hath deceived me, and changed my wages 10 times, but God suffered him not to hurt me. If he said thus, and he goes into the contract that they made, and when he gets to the end, he tells them about the dream that he saw, that God was going to bless the livestock. So we get to verse 14, and Rachel and Leah say unto him, is there yet any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Like, has our dad not spent our inheritance? Are we not counted of him strangers? For he hath sold us, and hath quite devoured also our money. For all the riches which God had taken from our father, that is ours and our children's. Now then, whatsoever God hath said unto thee, do. So Jacob brings his wives in. He says, here's the evidence. I've worked hard. You know your father has been deceitful all these years. God has withheld his hand from actually hurting me, but it's time to go. And the wives respond by saying, We know he has mistreated you, and we know he has also mistreated us. He does not care about us. And if you care about us, and if God cares about you, we are in a line. Let's do this. Let's leave the land of our father. So Jacob is going to rise up early. He is going to set out 3 days without telling anyone what's happened. And part of the reason he's not going to tell Laban, hey, I'm leaving, is because he knows Laban's not going to let him leave. So they head out. Word comes back to Laban that his son-in-law and these daughters have left. Verse 25. So Laban takes off. I'm sorry, let's go back to verse 24. Laban takes off. He gets right up to where Jacob's tent is, and Laban rests for the night. In verse 24, God came to Laban, the Syrian, in a dream by night, and said unto him, take heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. In other words, leave Jacob alone. You have nothing to say to him. And I think what we're about to get into is something pretty fascinating. There's a proverb. If you go with me to Proverbs chapter 25. Proverbs chapter 25. Proverbs chapter 25, and it's verse 8. We're in verses 8, 9, and 10. I think what's about to happen to Laban is what the writer of the Proverbs, Solomon, is warning here in these verses. So Proverbs 25, verses 8 through 10. Go not forth hastily to strive, lest thou know not what to do in the end thereof, when thy neighbor hath put thee to shame. A modern footnote application would be when Beck tells me not to honk at someone who cuts us off because you don't know who that person is. And they probably have a multitude of weaponry and are highly intoxicated. And what are you going to do then, right? And to which I say, be quiet. I've seen my action movies. I know what to do. But the proverb says, don't be quick to get in a fight with someone because you have no idea what they have against you. Verse 9. Debate thy cause with thy neighbor himself, and discover not a secret to another. If you truly have a complaint with your neighbor, take it to the neighbor. And if they divulge something to you that's important to help, you don't need then to go spread that with everyone else. Okay. Verse 10. Lest he that heareth it put thee to shame, and thy infamy turn not away. Now let's go back here to what's going to happen in Genesis. We know already through the text, Laban is not a good person to work with. Jacob has there's evidence that Jacob is good to work with. Even Jacob's wives understand our father-in-law has really not done well here. He is not someone you can really negotiate with. The only person who seems to not know it is Laban. And by not knowing it, what I mean is the only person who seems unwilling to accept it. Laban is not some fool. He knows he's changed wages. He knows he has spent money. He knows what he's done, but he, like most human beings, is very good at turning away from the inner working of his heart and not wanting to look at that sin. So when he shows up and God tells Laban, you need to keep your mouth shut. You need to not say nothing. I do think that is God giving Laban a little bit of some mercy here, saying, you're about to walk into a situation where you think you have the right of way, and you're about to get really embarrassed. At the end of C.S. Lewis's book, Till We Have Faces, there's a powerful scene. I think about this scene often. I wish I could live according to it better. The main character has had all sorts of terrible things happen to her in her life. And she takes these bad things that have happened to her, and she keeps a list of them, if you will. And she cannot wait to the end of time when she dies to stand before the gods and lay out all of her complaints against her fellow man, but ultimately against the gods. You've done wrong. And there's a very powerful scene when she passes away and goes in to the end of her life and stands before the gods. The very scroll that she is holding on to of all of her complaints just kind of corrodes in her arms and falls to pieces. And she becomes that much more aware of her sin and her flaws and how she gave back just as harshly and sometimes more harshly than how she was treated because she knew better. And it's quite a humbling scene in the text when she really has a final change of mind, if you will. So Laban just heard from God, don't say anything to this man, and watch what happens. Verse 25. Laban overtook Jacob. Verse 26. And Laban said to Jacob, what hast thou done that thou hast stolen away unawares to me and carried away my daughters as captives taken away with the sword? Wherefore didst thou flee away secretly and steal away from me, and didst not tell me that I might have sent thee away with mirth and with songs and with tabret and with harp? And hast not suffered me to kiss my sons and my daughters? Thou hast now done foolishly in so doing. It is in my power of hand to do you hurt. But the God of your father spake unto me yesternight, saying, take thou heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. And now, though thou wouldest needs be gone, because thou sore longest after thy father's house, yet wherefore hast thou stolen my gods? So Laban was just told, don't say anything to Jacob. And what does Laban do? He does what we do. I'm going to do my own thing. And notice what he says to Jacob. He says, you stole my daughters by force. You took my grandkids. I would have given you a sending away party, and you stole my gods. The stealing of gods is a smoke screen. This is a fascinating situation. So Laban does exactly the opposite of what God told him to do. So watch Jacob's response. Verse 31. Jacob said, Laban, I was afraid. You would have taken by force your daughters from me. What you've accused me of doing that I didn't do, you might very well have done to me, right? So this is ancient gaslighting, right? You probably would have killed me and taken your daughters, and I was afraid of you. Verse 32, he says, with whomsoever thou findest thy gods, let him not live. Before your brethren, discern thou what is thine with me, and take it with thee. For Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them. So Jacob says, look, I've lived according to righteousness. Because you are so stubborn and evil, I couldn't trust that you would have treated us well. That said, I don't want to take anything that belongs to you, so you can take it back if you find it and kill the person who has it. And he doesn't know that it's his wife Rachel who's stolen these gods. Rachel is going to put on a really good act of deception. She's going to give a reason for not being searched. Verse 35. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise up before thee. She's sitting on her camel, and she has the idols hidden there under her. For the custom of women is upon me. And Laban searched, but found not the images. So Jacob allows Laban to do this exhaustive search. It begs a really good question of why would Rachel take these gods? And I could be mistaken, but I think between the two wives, Leah might be someone who's more faithful to Jehovah than Rachel is. And yet, God still blesses Rachel. Why would she bring these gods with her? At any rate, we get down to verse 36. And Jacob was wroth and chode with Laban. My understanding here is that Laban is searching and searching and searching and searching and searching. He's really stalling here. Laban's not really concerned about the gods. That's that last final thing he's thrown on there, right? Because what Laban wants to do is he wants to stall. Laban wants to have control. Who in here doesn't want to have control? And to give the father-in-law his due diligence, what father-in-law or mother-in-law, for matter, should be like, sure, leave, go away, and I'll never see you again. Who cares? He doesn't want to lose his family. But now he is treading onto ground that does not belong to him. He is treading upon the will of God, and he wants to be the one who's in charge. And our desire for control, if taken too far, can turn us into doing things we never should do. So Jacob now is irate, right? You've searched long enough, we've not found the gods, and Jacob finally comes out and says what he's not said to his father-in-law, but he is now going to say it publicly. And we get down here. Verse 36. He said to Laban, so where Laban has falsely accused Jacob and has now searched Jacob, Jacob is finally going to speak up, and he is going to search Laban. He's going to rightly accuse Laban. Well, watch what he says. What is my trespass? what is my sin that thou hast so hotly pursued after me? I mean, the comparison to some things that are happening right now, it's just fascinating. Verse 37, whereas thou hast searched all my stuff, what hast thou found of all thy household stuff? Set it here before my brethren and thy brethren, that they may judge betwixt us both. We're going to have it all out, and we're going to let the audience decide. And watch what he says to Laban. This 20 years have I been with thee. Thy ewes and thy she-goats have not cast their young. And the rams of thy flock have I not eaten. That which was torn of beasts I brought not unto thee. I bear the loss of it. Of my hand didst thou require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Laban's got some really harsh terms as a boss, right? And Jacob has abided by all of those harsh terms. Verse 40, thus I was in the day, drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from mine eyes. Thus have I been 20 years in thy house. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters, 6 years for thy cattle, and thou hast changed my wages 10 times. Except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely thou hadst sent me away now empty. God hath seen mine affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked thee yesternight. God has seen me this whole time. The things you've accused me of, they cannot be laid at my feet, but here's what is laid at your feet. You have known it. Everyone has known it. For whatever reasons, we've not talked about it openly. I'm sure for very complex reasons, but now it's all laid out. And everyone can see what type of person you are, Laban. So what does Laban do? Next verse. And Laban answered and said, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and these cattle are my cattle, and all that thou seest is mine. And what can I do this day unto these my daughters, or unto their children which they have borne? He is still going to hold to the fact that they're his. Now, he is right in part. These are his daughters, right? And these grandchildren are of his line, and the cattle have come from his original cattle stock. But they now belong to Jacob. They're part of Jacob's life. So he's holding on to that, but then he says, what can I really do? And this is where Laban has a moment where he converts, because what he could do is he could still slaughter Jacob and all these people and still take his daughters, right? It's that final stand. Oh, I think we referenced it last week. When Macbeth, at the end of the play, Macbeth realizes he has no argument against his sin, he's given an opportunity to surrender and face his judgment. He refuses that and fights to his death. Laban here has a situation like Macbeth, but instead of responding like Macbeth, which is really the heart of Lucifer, who refuses to accept the truth, Laban turns and says, I'll let you go. And not only will I let you go, let's make a covenant together. Verse 47. They stacked stones. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. And we will see Gilead or Gilead later in the book of Judges. The word Jegar Sahadutha and Gilead means a heap of witnesses, or a witness heap. These rocks will stand that you and I have come to an agreement with one another. Jacob calls it Gilead, and then look at verse 49. He also calls it Mizpah, because the word Mizpah means watchtower. And what Jacob says is, the Lord will watch between me and thee when we are absent from one another. In other words, God sees all that we do at all the time. Part of Laban's argument is, Jacob, if you leave me, I will lose all those benefits by proxy that God gives you. And there's some truth to that. But what Jacob is saying too is, though I'm separating from you, God will still watch over me, but it doesn't mean that he stops watching you. God can still bless you and be with you. So even when there comes a time in our life when we must separate from one another, some kids are going to grow up and move out of their homes, move to other states, and not under any evil purposes. It doesn't mean that God turns his eyes on the people who stay in their towns. God will still watch over us. And so we get down here to the end of verse 55. And early in the morning, Laban rose up and kissed his sons and his daughters and blessed them. And Laban departed and returned unto his place. And so they have a witness. This is our agreement, our new agreement. Laban agrees, I won't come into your land. You don't come into my land. Don't you mistreat my daughters. That's a pretty good contract. Jacob says, I'm not going to mistreat your daughters. I also won't come into your land and mistreat you. And I'm confident that God will still watch over both of us. And next week when we come back, the next chapter we go into, that very first verse, Jacob's going to rise up and he's going to have an experience. And the word he's going to use to talk about the place brings back into our mind that regardless of how physical our disagreements or our agreements are in this world, there is still always the presence of the supernatural. There's still always at times there's presence of those evil spirits who would turn our hearts the way we shouldn't, but there's still also God who is ultimately in charge. And are we willing to see the hand of God and the will of God in our daily lives? And we'll come back and see that next week. Thank you very much.